She plowed her car straight through the rows like the plants were nothing more than lawn ornaments, splashing dirt on my hands as I knelt by the seedlings. Karen jumped out, high heels sinking in the mud, and pointed at me like she owned the field. "You can't grow that here," she yelled, waving a laminated HOA notice as if a clip of plastic could crush a season's work. The tractor tracks cut through 3 months of sweat and payday. My neighbor's little boy stood crying by a ruined row, clutching a crushed tomato like it hurt him more than the storm ever did. People always expect fury, shouting, threats, a lawyer's letter, but I wanted them to watch, really watch. So I wiped my hands, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "You drive through my crops one more time, and you'll learn what happens when you try to steal from my table." Her laugh was all teeth. She revved the engine like a declaration. The crowd backed up, unsure whether I'd call the cops or throw the first punch. I didn't move. I only smiled and walked to the old shed, where I kept a shovel and an apology letter, because I had something else in mind. And it wasn't just about making her stop. "People who eat from my land don't get run over," I said. The way she spat the words, "I'll make you pay," made the plan feel necessary and inevitable. She grinned like a cat and gunned the engine, thinking she was untouchable. The tires spun, mud sprayed, and the car sank with a wet, hungry sound, right into the trap I'd dug along the row she liked to destroy. She scrambled out, heels ruined, face a mixture of fury and shock. "Get me out of here!" she screamed, waving her laminated notice like it would pull her free. I stayed calm and walked over, mud on my boots, and said, "You drove through my family's food. You wanted to show power, now everyone can see what that power looks like." Neighbors came running, phones out, and the kid whose tomato row she flattened earlier stood with his fists clenched. Karen bent to the car and started digging with her hands, trying to free it, then froze when I opened the glove box. Inside was a small stack of envelopes, each with names and amounts, cash, dates, the word cleanup written on one. She looked up, pale. That's not mine," she lied. A woman near me held up her phone and said, "That's money I gave her to ignore the truck that crushed my fence." Karen's voice went thin. "You can't prove that." I smiled and tapped my phone. Hidden camera footage from last week played clear as day. Karen signaling the truck driver, laughing as the wheels tore through the seedlings. The crowd went quiet. She shrieked, "You set me up!" I said softly, loud enough for the block to hear, "You set them up, so they'd pay you to clean it. That's theft." Her eyes flashed to the road as a patrol car turned the corner. Someone had already dialed 911. She reached for her phone, hands shaking, and yelled, "I'll have you removed! I'll sue!" A neighbor called back, steady and fierce, "Not this time! You broke our lives for cash!" The mud under her car looked like the mark of a sentence, and when the officer stepped out of his cruiser, notebook in hand, Karen finally understood she'd driven straight into more than mud. The officer stepped out slow, eyes sweeping the scene like he was trying to read a map. Karen's hands were filthy, her heels stuck in the mud, and for a second she looked small. No clipboard, no crowd, just a woman who'd driven through a neighbor's food. She straightened, tried to put on the old voice. "Officer, he set a trap. This is entrapment." The officer didn't flinch. He asked for IDs, then, quiet as a summer storm, said, "We have a complaint about intimidation and suspected theft." I didn't shout. I walked to him and handed the envelope still in my fingers, cash peeking from the flap, and the phone with the footage. The officer watched the video where Karen and a truck driver high-fived after flattening the rows, the text on the envelopes clear as day, "Cleanup, $400. Neighbors lined up like witnesses on a rope. The little boy with the tomato row pointed and said, "She ran over our tomatoes." The woman whose fence had been cleaned up showed her bank transfer. A man I'd never spoken to before pressed his face near the camera and said, "She told me to pay or my goats would be gone." The officer's face hardened. She screamed for the crowd to stop lying, to remember who kept the neighborhood safe. But the ledger in my hand told a different story. Names, amounts, dates, and a signature that matched the HOA checks the county clerk had already flagged. The officer read a line from the report, then looked up. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for extortion and criminal damage to property." She went white, then furious. She lunged for her car keys like a wild thing, but the officer moved first and snapped the handcuffs on. As they closed, she spat, "You set me up." I stepped forward and, calm as a measured tide, said, "No, Karen, you dug your own hole." The crowd didn't cheer yet. They watched, breath held, because the small victories always feel fragile at first. Then came the twist no one expected. As the officer searched Karen's phone, he found a thread of messages to a local realtor, proof that she'd been selling special access to developers who wanted cheap land. And inside the vehicle, beneath the muddy floor mat, sat a deed transfer stamped the week before, half the farmer's strip already promised to a buyer in the city. Karen had been clearing more than crops. She'd been clearing ownership. The officer's jaw tightened when he saw it. "You tried to steal the land," he said flatly. "That's federal." People's faces changed, furious, betrayed, stunned. The woman with the fence started to cry quietly. The boy held his tomato like a small, precious flag. My daughter, who had watched from the porch, came forward and hugged my leg, eyes wide. I crouched down and kissed her head, then looked at Karen as they led her away. "This was never about rules," I said so everyone could hear. "It was about control." As the patrol car drove away, a neighbor shouted, "What about the buyers?" I showed the deed and pointed toward the county clerk's office. "We fix it," I said. "We take back what was stolen." The officer paused at the cruiser and nodded at me. Respect, plain as a salute. "You handled that well," he said. I watched Karen's taillights blink until they disappeared down the road. Then I turned to the rows that were still standing, the ones we'd saved, and felt something settle inside me, heavy, steady. There would be court and paperwork and maybe threats from new corners. But under my hands the earth was still warm from the storm sun, and that was proof enough for now. A neighbor ran up, breathless, holding a paper with a bold headline. "Local farmer exposes HOA racketeering." The words flickered like lightning. I felt every year of service and every quiet sacrifice fold into that one sharp truth. This community was ours. I folded the paper and looked at my daughter, and then I said something that would echo on social feeds and porches alike. "You don't get to steal someone's table and call it community."
I didn't sleep that night. The words, "This isn't over," kept replaying in my head like a ticking clock. By morning, I'd already checked every camera on the property twice. The footage showed nothing new, just the wind brushing the crops and headlights passing far off on the road. But around 5:30 a.m., I caught something. A shadow near the fence line. Someone tall, moving slow. I grabbed my flashlight and went out. The air was heavy with dew, and the mud still smelled like last night's storm. I kept the beam low and steady. When I reached the edge of the field, a voice came out from the dark. "You shouldn't have embarrassed her." I froze. The figure stepped closer. A man, maybe in his 40s, wearing a cheap suit and boots that didn't belong on a farm. "Karen wasn't working alone," he said. "She had partners, and they don't like noise." I held the flashlight on him. "And you are?" He smiled faintly. "Let's just say I helped her keep the deals running smooth. You should have taken the payout when you had the chance." "Payout?" I asked. "50 grand to stay quiet," he said. "It's less messy than the other option." I let out a short breath and shook my head. "You people really don't learn, do you?" He stepped forward. You think this is a game, farmer? No, I said quietly. I think it's a confession. I angled the flashlight upward, revealing the small blinking light on my shoulder, the same body cam the police had given me after the last arrest. The red dot blinked like a heartbeat. His expression cracked. Everything you just said, I told him, is being recorded. You just threatened a witness in an open investigation. He turned, ready to run, but the sound of tires crunching gravel stopped him cold. Two sheriff's cruisers pulled up from the road, lights cutting through the dawn mist. The deputies stepped out, guns lowered but steady. The man cursed under his breath. You set me up. I smiled a little. Seems to be a pattern lately. They cuffed him right there beside the fence. One of the deputies, a young guy who'd grown up around here, looked at me and said, You just took down the last one, didn't you? I nodded, eyes on the sunrise climbing over the crops. Yeah, but it wasn't just me. It was everyone she scared, everyone she took from. They just needed to see what she really was. The deputy smiled. Well, they'll see it now. As they drove the man away, I turned back toward the house. My daughter stood on the porch, wrapped in her blanket again, sleepy but smiling. It's over now? She asked. I walked up, put my hand on her shoulder, and said, Yeah, this time it's over for real. We stood there, watching the sun spill across the fields that were finally ours again. For the first time, there was no noise. No shouting, no engines tearing up the land, just the sound of birds and wind. I looked down at her and said softly, You see, kiddo? They thought they could bury us in mud. They forgot that's where things grow. She smiled, and together we walked back into the house, leaving the old traps and the old fears behind. A month passed, and the land started breathing again. The rows grew thick and green, the way they were meant to before all the chaos. Every seed that had been crushed now stood tall, as if the soil itself wanted to prove a point. The neighbors stopped by often, helping, talking, laughing, like the field had become our meeting place. Nobody mentioned the HOA anymore. The signs were gone, the fences mended, and for once, the only rules were the ones nature set. I built a small wooden board at the edge of the property. My daughter painted it herself. The letters weren't perfect, but the words were. Our land, our work, our freedom. People slowed their cars just to read it. Some honked, some waved. One afternoon, a reporter came by asking for a statement for a story they were doing about small farmers standing up to HOA abuse. I thought for a moment, looked out over the field and said, They called this land trouble, said it didn't belong to me. But I fought for this dirt just like I fought for my country, and I'll be damned if I let anyone take either one. He smiled, wrote it down, and when the piece aired, those words spread. Messages started coming in, people from across the country telling their own stories about standing up to fake authority, to corruption, to people who thought power meant ownership. It wasn't just about crops anymore. It was about principle. That night, sitting on the porch, my daughter leaned against me and asked, Why do people like her try to control everyone? I thought about it for a long moment, then said, Because they're scared of people who don't need permission to live free. She nodded, quiet for a while. Then she whispered, We didn't lose, did we? I smiled. No, sweetheart. We didn't just win. We planted something they can't ever dig up. The wind brushed through the field, carrying the sound of the flag we had put up by the gate. It wasn't big or fancy, just one we'd had folded for years. But when it caught the light, it shone bright against the horizon, the same way truth always does when it finally comes out. And with that, the land, our land, was quiet again. Not silent, just peaceful. The kind of peace that's earned. They drove through my field to break me, I said once in an interview. But they forgot. Some of us were trained to survive storms. And that's how it ended. Not with revenge, not with noise, but with roots that ran too deep to be taken.